Welcome back to Ann Double D. This has been an exciting season so far. We seem to just have these incredible people who have written incredible books coming along to share more of their work. And I'm Dave Evans, and you are?
Did you forget? Debbie Halls Evans.
Debbie, before we introduce our guest, and if you're watching, you'll be able to see who it is. As someone called James, it seems, in the Zoom
I
room.
just realized I'm logged into my husband's account.
Even better.
He's in
Indeed.
the background eating lunch, so if you need him here.
Now, I have to say, we'll ask you to introduce yourself in a second, but you are one of three people this year who have made some of my cycle ride training really pleasantly annoying. Because I used to say Brené Brown writes these great books that when you listen to her work, that she leaves you in a space at the end. You just have a choice to make, right? You either apply the lessons she shared with you that works, or you stay feeling terrible. Your book, for me personally, Victoria, had the exact same effect. So, Debbie, would you like to introduce her?
I would like to introduce Victoria Song, author of Bending Reality, but much more than that. And that's the bit I'd love to explore. So, Victoria, I joined your abundance workshop as well, which was incredible. And I'd like to talk about that too. But first, talk to us about your book. So don't know if you're aware of what we do, but as coaches, I'm a real bibliophile. I'm obsessed with books to the point of when we bought our old farmhouse, we built a library. So books are a real thing for us to unlearn and learn, apply. And your book was one that I shared with Dave after I'd read it twice. I just loved it. And I think I loved it because it really, you would use the word expansion and contraction, and it blew my mind because it was so simple narrative and description of how to be. And I'd never thought of it like that. So I'm talking now. You talk about your book and what it means to you and why you even got to writing it.
Oh, yes. Okay. So I had gone down the rabbit hole reading books, studying with masters and coaches and healers, and I've now hired over 30 of them, done all the retreats, all the, different 1 week advanced trainings. And to me, I started to see these similarities, these patterns, these themes that created the meta framework that I used for bending reality. And so bending reality was really like, I'm an academic. I went to Yale undergrad. I went to Harvard Business School. So I kind of just applied that like straight A student lens to studying from all of these people. And then when I saw what was emerging as like, oh, this feels like the meta framework behind what everybody is doing and saying, even though they're calling it something else, it feels like this is the universal law, or really like the code that seems to explain what everybody is teaching. And so that's what inspired me to release Bending Reality. And it's called How to Make the Impossible Probable as a subtitle. And so to me, I really believe that with this code, with these universal laws, you can actually make the impossible probable in your life.
So knowing that, and by the way, we do need to talk about some of your history because it is incredible how you have developed you in this process and your learning. And I think that's the big part about the book. There is an element around, there's that factual science element, and then this real understanding of emotions and bringing them together in a clarity, which I think is really unique. There's not many books that actually explain it in such a way. You're either totally emotional without the science, or you're totally science without the emotions, and you've blended the two. So knowing how you've codified it, what are the most important things that you took away from all of these other workings that you've done and kind of brought into this meta framework?
Yeah. And so you introduced the words expansion versus contraction, which is the first chapter of the book. It really gives you the foundation of what that means. And so for anyone who's new to my work and just tuning in, you can think of contraction as like, if you were to think of the last 7 days of this past week and just think about something that didn't go the way you wanted it to. Maybe it was a disappointment or stress, or, something not going according to plan. You can just notice immediately somatically, you're like, oh, my chest is tightening up. Like, I kind of want to forget about it. I don't want to think about it. It was annoying, frustrating, whatever it is. We have like this physical experience of what contraction feels like in the body. And then the opposite would be, okay, now I want you to reflect on something that went well, something that maybe went better than you expected. Maybe it was something you're grateful for from the last 7 days. you'll notice immediately like, oh, your heart space opens up and it feels like your breathing is slower and your chest and your shoulders go back. And again, physically, you have the sensation of what expansion feels like in your being. And what I found is that whether you're a positive psychology, person, or you're telling everyone to have a gratitude journal, or the importance of, peak performance and getting into your flow state, or you're telling people the importance of following your values and having a mission statement, all of these things get you into the state of being of expansion. And so I found that this is kind of a shortcut, or like a way to almost cheat code to be like, follow your passion. What does that feel like? Expansion in your being. Oh, be really grateful. What does that feel like? Expansion. You can even say, oh, do you trust in God's will? If you're a religious person, you'd be like, yeah, well, when you trust and surrender to God's will, what does that feel like? Oh, that feels expansive in your being. So you start to realize like, oh, whether you're religious or you're not, whether you're an athlete studying flow state, or a life coach telling you should have values and a mission statement and purpose, all of these things just get you into this expansive state of being. So that's kind of like the meta framework in a nutshell.
Yeah, I love it. As a ridiculous, like almost step into the right for a minute. I was coaching recently this ridiculous idea at first of how do I sometimes get myself into a flow state that isn't what you would expect. And I found myself explaining, yeah, Victoria, I just want you to watch Debbie's face for a second, and because she'll give so much away. I was explaining that if I'm a little bit blocked, I stop and look at things I like bicycle frames, and I know that's not very exciting, but I really love looking at those and what's available because I need one next year. And once I sense that, like you said, that biological change, where I'm really, this is what I like, I switch the channels in my head. So I
Yeah,
don't stay there and spend all day doing it. I use it as a mechanic to get to where I want to go. And I thought initially when I was coaching this sounds ridiculous, but it is as you said, a shortcut to getting into the better mental space.
exactly. Absolutely.
And what, from your experience, and I know you've been practicing this and sharing this a lot in regards to your business. So what's the one thing people usually get wrong? So if we consider, expansion and contraction specifically, where do people go wrong? Because my understanding is most people know what they need to do. They just don't do it.
Mm. Yeah, something that's been coming up, and I actually just taught this on my last inner circle call, is that I think there's a difference between, oh, I want to be expansive as much as possible versus like, I'm actually ignoring the truth of my situation. I'm kind of spiritual bypassing, and I'm kind of brainwashing myself to stay positive with positive affirmations. And I'm ignoring, the truth of how I feel about how disappointed I am, or how upsetting this is, or how frustrating this is. So even my neighbors here who are quite devout religious beings here, they often feel like, oh, like I'm just supposed to count my blessings, I'm just supposed to stay grateful, I shouldn't complain about anything. Even when they're have a child who's sick or a child who might die, they're trying to convince themselves to like count their blessings and say, this is the worst thing that ever happened, but relatively it's not so bad because I know so many people in the world suffer more. And it's like they're discounting their emotions and their feelings. And so what I have found is there's almost like a superficial holding of expansion, and it's not
Yeah.
really deeply embodied, because the only way to really get to expansion is to move through contraction and be able to feel through. And sometimes when you have a good cry, you notice this immediately, like, oh, I let it out. And then people with their HRV monitors have been telling me like, oh, my stress went down after I felt my emotions, or after I cried, my HRV improved. And you can actually see quickly, biometrically, you can see the feedback of actually feeling your emotions, feeling the contraction gets you into a place of expansion. But if you try to ignore or shortcut it by like skipping over contraction and say like, I'm just going to think positive thoughts, I'm going to think positive thoughts, you're not really going to be able to stabilize a true feeling of expansion. And I've also seen that this often leads to health issues, right? So I've seen plenty of people who, they're grateful for their life and they try to smile and stay happy. And maybe they're even people pleasers and they make sure everybody around them is really happy, but then they have thyroid cancer, or there's something going on in their body where it's like, they're not speaking their truth. They're not, acknowledging how they feel. And then that's turning to disease in their body.
That's really fascinating because it's almost in the example you gave, it's a form of mild blocking, isn't it? So You can proactively say, I'm leaving that in a box in my head. I'm not dealing with it. And you then, life, in my experience, means you've got to eventually. Your brain will force you to deal with it. But this other version of staying almost in a space where you're not acknowledging that really annoyed me, or I actually feel really let down in this moment, not tomorrow and the next month and the next 5 years, but by not having that second to let the energy pass through you, or to, as you said, to live it, both are as bad as each other. The one locking away, and also they're in denial that it actually happened. It stopped
Yeah.
you from progressing.
Yes. Yeah. So I think sometimes when people read my book, they go, okay, great. How do I just stay in expansion and never feel contraction again? And I'm like, no, you just become a master at having a fast emotional metabolism and being able to move through your contraction quite quickly. So now something happens, it doesn't ruin your day. You know how to get yourself back into it through alchemizing that energy pattern, moving through it versus resisting it, because what we resist persists. And so I've just seen so often that people really don't even realize, oh, I actually do have contraction in my being. I'm just like trying to ignore it or pretend it's not true, because a part of me feels guilty to feel bad, because what do I have to feel bad about? My life is so blessed, right? So there's all these reasons why, whether for religious reasons or
Yeah.
trying to stay positive, they just are in denial.
Debbie, I know I'm stopping you from having your thoughts here, but I have to say, a fast emotional metabolism. If you're listening, my goodness, going into 2025, is that not something that you want, or in the future? Because I realized, Debbie, I just time-stamped the podcast. What an error. But nonetheless, any day in the future, who wouldn't want a fast metabolism response rate? I think they should put that on things like Oura and Gadget Watch, shouldn't they? Because I want that.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I'm sure that's what HRV is a proxy for, honestly, your recovery.
Yeah, totally. I love it. I think that one of the funny things that I found is Debbie and I, when we both were when Debbie brought it to my attention, which is how it works in our book reading sharing, is I found us playing almost table tennis with it, and discussing, you know, from shallow to seriously deep ones, and contrasting where they left us. And then, like you described, finding that difficulty of, are we in contraction here or are we in expansion? And then finding the road from one to the other through discussion and working on it together. That was really quite a breakthrough for us, wasn't it, Debbie?
Yeah, completely. And I think one of the things that you say, I mean, there is in your book, I mean, I've got tabs, I think Dave's got it on his desk, but I listened to it, and I also read it, because that's how I really absorb information super quick. And I think for me, it was just this, I was constantly asking Dave questions. And I also heard you do that with your husband, is that you have these debates and discussions about kind of talking it out. And where
Yeah.
I'm amazed that a lot of people don't do that. They don't have these conversations. Sometimes I don't find them uncomfortable, but where you just say what's there, it's not I don't sit in it. I just go, I've just had this thought. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually just today, one of my neighbors is LDS, which is like the Mormon religion, and she's such a wonderful human being. We were like baking cookies together, and she knows that I'm also very spiritual, but I'm not necessarily part of an organized religion. So we were just going back and forth and talking about like both the similarities, but also like, is this a difference, or is this actually still a universal law? We were just articulating it differently, And so it's so fascinating. I love talking to people who are open-minded enough to not feel defensive, to not feel threatened by my point of view, but to actually have dialogue and to discuss it. So one of the things we were talking about that I found interesting was, she was telling me that she's like, don't you believe Jesus is the Son of God and that there's one God, et cetera, et cetera. And then I was like, well, based on your religion, like we're all children of God, And so to me, what's more accurate is that we are all connected with God. We're all part of divinity. And so for me, I think, because I understand frequency and energy so well, I think one of the challenges with the religion is sometimes religion makes you feel like you're so less than compared to God, and you're not deserving of God's sacrifice for your sins, and then that guilt makes you feel like, oh, I'm not deserving and I'm unworthy and I feel so bad and guilty all the time. And that's obviously a frequency that's going to create a reality that makes you have things that kind of validate that you're not worthy of your dreams and your desires and what you want in your life. And so to me, I said it's more empowering and it's more accurate when we say like we were created in God's image, to see it as like, just as God is a creator, we are actually creators, and we are that powerful, and that we can create our reality, and we have so much more agency than we realize. But when we hold God as like the supreme being and we're so less than, we never actually access the frequency that is expansive, that allows us to bend our reality. And so these are the kinds of conversations that I get to have with my neighbors, you know, and it's really cool. And I feel like, yeah, I feel very fortunate to have these conversations with people.
But I also think there's an openness and expansiveness to actually to accommodate those conversations, because I think there is so much polarization in the world today, is that we then sit in our own space of perspective and we're not willing to hear what somebody else. Doesn't mean we have to agree.
Yeah.
But I just think, you know, that if we could have more of those conversations where
Yes,
it's respectful, right? So respect
totally.
probably generates a different frequency as well.
Yes, I feel like it is very much like a yes and versus a like, no, 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 like mine's the truth and I'm right, you know? So yes, I do feel that the more contracted we are, the more unsafe it feels to be around a perspective that's different from ours. The more we shut down, we feel, the more defensive we get, the more triggered into fight or flight we also become, you know? And yeah, and it's anything that threatens our perspective, our way of being, it's hard to ask that of someone, you know? And so I feel like that's one of the blessings of being alive at this time, is I feel like there are so many spiritual teachers and so many perspectives and so much openness to understanding that we might all have a piece of the puzzle, you know, but we kind of need all our perspectives.
I love it.
So big question. Knowing that, I know you kind of touched on how you've done some of the exploratory work and you brought it into your book. How have you got here? So I know you gave us some insight into Yale, but how has Victoria got to this point right now?
Yeah, I feel like there's like so many versions of this story I could tell. So let's see. I think the long story short of it, and you can dig in and double click on anything you want to know, but like I had a difficult childhood growing up, and I feel that I don't feel a victim of it though, because I do feel my soul was sovereign to choose. You know, I had some soul agreement with my family. I do believe that in order for me to be who I am today with the beliefs and the calling that I have, I had to have gone through the childhood that I did. I would not have sought out support and healing and going on my own coaching journey if I didn't have that childhood. So I did have a difficult childhood, and there was emotional abuse, physical abuse. You know, I was bullied in school as well. And so there was just all these reasons why I felt like maybe I was deserved to be treated this way. I wasn't worthy of more. Maybe, you know, something about me just makes people triggered for no reason. So it was like almost like something inherently weird and off about me upsets people. And when people are mad around me, they seem to take it out on me. So there's this feeling of like being unsafe when people are upset around me as well. So all of that kind of showed up in unhealthy relationships romantically. I had, you know, colleagues and bosses in my finance career that were also not very kind and not very functionally healthy and all the things. So I do feel that until we really resolve and heal these patterns that make us feel like maybe I deserve to be treated this way, maybe I'm not worthy of my dreams, until we resolve that, we tend to create a simulation, a reality that just reflects those beliefs that are self-generating our reality. And so that's why a huge part of my book is also really examining and excavating what these beliefs are that are actually forming your reality. Again, because we're that powerful, it's the meaning we make that shapes our lives. And so I really had to do that hard inner work on myself to be like, what is it that I'm assuming is true about me and the world and people that is making this reality self-perpetuating, where I keep dating the wrong person, I keep finding myself in these relationships that are not healthy, and I'm also not happy. Like, even though I had the resume and the gold stars, deep down I felt broken, alone, like unlovable. Like there were all these things that made me feel so unfulfilled deep down. So based on that, I hired my first life coach like 11 years ago, but it wasn't because I realized I needed help. It was because I was asking everybody I knew, do you have a coach that could help me with my speaking skills, my presentation skills? I thought, you know, as a venture capitalist, being like the only woman in the room, being the youngest woman in the room, I started when I was 23 years old investing. I wanted to improve my gravitas and my speaking abilities. And so that's what I was looking for when I hired my first coach. And it's so funny how we have like the reason we think we're hiring somebody, and then like our soul has a deeper calling of like, well, this is really why I'm going down this path, because it turns out I'm going to be a coach one day, and like the, you know, years down the road that I'm not aware of right now.
I didn't,
Sorry, Victoria.
no, I was just going to just reflect back to anybody listening. What I really like about watching you as you talk to us, it's as though I'm speaking to the Matrix. It's the construct of your language patterns that reveals so much. And if you're listening, I hope you notice it. From what you resist persists. The list of little anecdotes that you're throwing into your narrative that would stand in their own right. It's literally, if you put them right here, they'd stand and go, I need to think about that for a bit. Is as you play this back and listen to this multiple times, my goodness, that just the richness of it. So I just wanted to reflect. Thank you. Um,
Oh, thank you.
Debbie, I loved your question. I'd also like to know, what do you spend your time doing? So we've got the book, which is fantastic, and I recommend anybody listens to Bending Reality. Before you tell us about what you spend your time doing, we are in December 2024, and uh, Debbie and I go against the grain a bit with New Year resolutions, and we spend a lot of time talking people out of them.
Mhm.
What's your view on a New Year resolution?
I have like a multiple question page process. It's not really a resolution. But yeah, I do feel that more important than like goals is really our identity and who are we and who we're really committed to being in this new year. And I think that that's more important work to do than even like, here's what I'm going to do, here are all the resolutions and to-do list of things I want to do in the new year. Um, and I would also say like, I mean, there's so many things we can say, but I used to teach, and I probably will still teach continuously, but I have a New Year's resolution course. It's not quite called New Year's resolution, it's called New Year's Launchpad. And in that course, one of the activities that I take everyone through is actually to look at anybody that they're holding any resentment or any grudge or any frustration against. And you might not even think like, oh, I need to forgive this person. But if their name comes to mind as someone who quote unquote wronged you in this last year or at any point in your lifetime, part of the activity in that launch pad is actually to go resolve where you might be creating blocks, any places of contraction, any baggage that is actually weighing you down. We go and we do a healing exercise to remove that. And so these are examples of things that I feel like allow us to move into the new year very powerfully. But in general, with my own life, instead of holding goals that inherently have timelines and I need to get this done by 2025, I really more have these visions for my life of like, this would feel so juicy and I would be so excited and enthusiastic if this were to manifest in my reality. And it has more like an energetic feeling, a vibration to the vision. And because I hold it as a vision and versus like a goal, it doesn't have like a timeline attached to it. Because immediately when we attach something to time, we make it tied to scarcity and lack, right? Inherently, because time is always running out. Time is something that's finite. Everything else, money we can replace, but time we cannot get back. I also, if you go into my programs, I even talk about why like the nature of time is just a 3D linear experience, but in the 50, there's not even a time as a concept. So for that reason, in order for me to play in a higher level of frequency, I don't attach to things on a timeline. I don't say things like, I want this to happen by 2025. And I really hold things more in that expansive framework of like, this is a vision that I'm anchoring into. And if I hold it from the place of expansion, it often surprises me and it happens way faster than I could have planned and expected. But again, like you kind of need to detach from time in order to collapse time.
Just for a moment there, that is a mic drop in itself. Yeah, it's true though, isn't it? And I think about how many times have you met people like us who could tell you a story about your business needed something, and then out of nowhere, at the moment of need, it occurred. And perhaps even there's been a long lead time to that moment happening. And in the lead time, nothing was happening. But when the time came, your point about time, where everything was slightly more amplified, the moment of manifestation arrived because you got your feelings and your mind in order. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden the answer appears.
Yes,
Uh,
it's like a synchronicity, it feels like that. You're in the right place at the right time and you got the perfect introduction and everything just works out.
because we want to share this episode as this year finishes and ask people, go back to the book and we'll come on to what you're spending your time doing now immediately, is to actually invite them listening to this podcast episode to bend their reality next year as the turn of this year. And I really love what you've suggested to the listeners about stopping and thinking about people you may have wronged, doing the healing work. And I also really enjoyed what you said. Who do you want to be next year? Who are you committing yourself to being? and being that and finding the space to become that. That is a brilliant piece of advice going from one year to another. Much more
Yeah.
you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I often ask on that kind of multi-page New Year's reflection that I give out. If you join my newsletter, you can actually receive it. I just hand it out for free as a gift. And one of the questions on that is, who are you becoming? And that's something that you can say, like, I'm becoming a courageous version of myself. I'm becoming a more loving, compassionate version of myself. I'm becoming someone who's bolder and like being able to lead and, in a more visible
Yeah.
way, right? But you get to really claim, who do you want to become?
Nice. I love it. So, Debbie.
So, well, Dave, you did ask Victoria a question about what do you do now? What you do spend your finite time doing now?
Yeah, so I really follow what I say in the book, which is like what feels expansive for you, allowing that to evolve as you grow, like your interests change and evolve with you. And so I would say right now, like what lights me up is I mean, not surprisingly, I love studying the nature of reality. Like you can kind of hear it in my language. I'm like, what is time? And like, what is this 3D simulation? Are we creating it or is someone else creating it? So I love to study the nature of reality. And then I also really like exploring kind of these mysteries of the universe. So what are these higher dimensional beings that we seem to be in contact with? Are they aliens? Are they something else? Where do we originate from? Like these kind of bigger questions that are kind of existential. Like I really like exploring that. And then I also, I feel that I'm always on a lifelong journey of understanding and studying deeper, more effective healing modalities, because that was such a huge part of my own journey. I always want to help accelerate that process for my clients so that it doesn't take them a decade to do what I did. I want to be able to say, like, here in 3 months, you can go through this accelerated evolution, So I also am very enthusiastic every time I learn a healing modality. When I take time off of work, I often go study with healing masters and try to understand more of like the energetics and what that really entails. And again, like finding the common themes, the common threads across different teachers.
I love it. That's true. That's terrific. I had an interesting conversation with two of our blended family children today about time and specifically the energy uh, influences that you've made around how we are all here experiencing this moment in the same time, and yet we can become contracted to differences. And I think if you, in the work you're exploring, I can't wait to learn more about things. I'm sure things you're going to write about in the future about what you're discovering that can help us work on just that better. So that, if you're 23 or 20 and you look at somebody like us, not you, me or Debbie who are older, and you go, what do they know? As opposed to, it should be, what do they know? And the same would come from us back the other way. What do they notice and know that we didn't see? And finding that energy middle space where we can all be expansive. And
Yeah.
I'm really excited to hear more about the work you're doing. Um, in the midst of all of this, I think you have answered this question. We do like to ask, what is your and? And, what is your answer to that? What's your, at the crutch of it, what's the thing that's still just dry? You mentioned it earlier on about lighting up. Just for the listeners, what is it that makes Victoria go, this is where I'm going to be today. This is what I'm doing.
I feel that service is really the most enlivening thing for me. And if I ever get caught up worrying about, oh no, like how did I come off in that interview or like anything else, it always just like messes with my frequency, my expansive state. The thing that makes me feel most expansive is just knowing like, oh, I was able to say or do something and offer something that was exactly what that person needed to hear or connect with on that topic today. And so that's what I really call service. And yeah, and I feel that we're all wired differently. I think on some level, all of us at our most whole level would be very heart-led. But for some people, that heart-ledness might be um, taking a position of leadership that's very visible and really impacting communities that way. For me, it is really more just service piece of just the more that I can help people on any level, whether it's a neighbor or like we're fostering dogs right now, like on any level I can help, that feels really good for me.
That's brilliant. I love it. And I think if you're listening, it's very applicable. Anyone could do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, they often say like, oh, if you feel like your heart chakra is a little bit closed, like just give. If you feel blocked in your heart at all, if you wish you felt more loved, if you don't feel the connection you wish this holiday, when you give, I feel that our beings almost cannot experience the difference between giving something and receiving something. So when your heart is filled with so much love and care for another, you also benefit because now your whole cells are flooded with love and care. You don't even realize it's because you're giving that love and care. Your body gets to benefit from that feeling as well. And so it is this beautiful, like when you give, you really receive, even directly at that cellular level.
I've got a squillion more questions, but I'm also really conscious of time. So I've got one question. If you weren't doing this right now, and what would you be doing? So if you weren't writing or teaching or coaching, what were you doing? And is there a different version of Victoria in like a parallel reality? And does that even
For
exist?
sure.
There's
Yes.
so many different conversations here that we
Oh
could.
my gosh. I feel like when I dream, I astro project to parallel universes, and sometimes they're really far out there, like future technologies. And then sometimes they're really simple, like what would have happened if I married my first boyfriend, like parallel universes.
Yeah.
So yes, I do believe that there are, even in this moment, in this time and space, like there are multiple parallel universes here, and that every moment, whether we're expansive or contracted, we're moving and shifting timelines more and more to the reality that we want to be in. So you always want to be like, I think it's helpful to have that concept in mind, to know that the timelines are actually just layered on top of each other. So it's so close. It's just about you nudging your energy and your frequency toward the one that you prefer. And just knowing that will keep you more mindful and intentional with your energy every moment, what you're choosing, what you're preferring in that moment. So if there was another alternate version of me that would follow what lights me up, I would have an amazing singing voice and be an incredible dancer. And I would probably be some sort of singer, songwriter, performer.
Fantastic.
Perfect.
And my name suits that. Victoria Song. Could have been a singer.
Perfectly.
No, I love that because we watched an Apple TV show. I don't even know what it was called, about they went into the black box and there were all these alternative realities of.
It was fantastic, but also I think what you said earlier on is you need to understand that it does exist. We've been forced a societal metric. This is what you should do. This is what you should know. The word in itself is limited and contracted. You should. But I just think, for me, just your work instantly opens me up. It makes me feel expansive. Bit fangirl in here, but just in regards to I think the way that you've articulated it and the way that people can connect to something, because it is complex, right? You've made something really complex. You've taken this whole many different learnings and you've not labeled them. I think that's the easiest thing I can explain it is you've unlabeled things, which for us is joy, because that's what we do on a regular basis. People get stuck in the label, whereas when you talked about talking to your neighbor, there wasn't a definitive, this person is only this. They are all of these other realities that this person coexists in as well. I could talk to you. I've got hundreds of questions. I could talk to you for hours, but I'm very conscious of time. And I really just want to say a massive thank you for sharing that time with us. I know that you've got lots of amazing stuff on your website, so I would love to be able to share that as well under the podcast so people can actually see what you do. I did your Abundance Mastermind and it was glorious, and all I did was rant and rave about it with Dave. And I still go back and read my notes and reference it back because it really did help me stay grounded. And I do genuinely believe that you've got so much to give and offer, and for people to experience it. And I think initially get your book and then work with you if they can too.
Thank you so much, Debbie and Dave. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I'm very passionate about these topics and sharing, and always sharing at the edge of my understanding, which honestly changes every single day. You asked me what I do with my time, and it is really just immersing myself in studying both meditation, where I might connect dots just sitting in stillness with myself, but then also really like even watching networks like Gaia, for instance, which maybe you're familiar with, but I love immersing myself in different spiritual teachers' frameworks. And then with that, lens again of like, how does this fit into that meta framework? And, what are the commonalities between what everybody is teaching, and really finding that universal truth, like really bringing that modern lens to these universal laws.
Love it. I think your messages in this episode have been fantastic, because one of the hearts in our movement with Debbie and I through the AND team is to teach people next year to find their space to thrive. And I think you've given them a bedrock of something to really consider throughout this conversation, of things to really think through, stop, pause, consider, and to, everything about the world at the moment is tough. It's rigid. It's got risk. And this is about, forget all of that, all of those constructs. This is decide who you're going to be. Find
Yeah.
your space of expansion.
Totally. It's not what's happening, it's how you respond to it that dictates your frequency. And so the way I see it is like, imagine you're watching a television and there's multiple programs on. We all know that we can pick a different channel, but there are all these parallel universes that are happening even within this 3D reality, because we can see people living on different programs even within our construct of reality right now on this planet. So I think that it's less important, like, the bad news that you see, and more, how are you choosing to respond and still show up as the version of you that you're choosing to be. That's what's going to allow you to move toward the timeline, and collectively move toward the timeline that is in the best and highest of all.
Well, I have to say,
Mic drop there.
yeah, this has been an excellent conversation as we've been exploring with Victoria's song, Bending Reality, the concepts on expansion and contraction and personal growth, her story of how she ended up doing what she has been doing and is still doing today, and the importance of feeling emotions rather than suppressing them. As you go to the end of this year and you start the next one, and you're blessed enough to have however many days of that year ahead, have a think about who you're going to be and how you're going to practice being that person, that version. And think about what frequency you're on and how you're constructing your reality. One of the special messages, I think, at the end of all of this, alongside all the others, is this nice note about how Victoria likes to serve and how she lights up serving others, and the power of giving, not just to the moment, to the person, but to the experience. It's the power of giving to the cells in your body, to your being, and to your energy source. Victoria's song, before I close the podcast out, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been Ann Double D, and we are so excited to have done this episode starring Victoria's song. The question is, this end of year and the start of the new one, will you bend your reality and make the impossible probable?